السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وأصحابه وبارك وسلم. We welcome you today, O respected mothers and sisters, and whoever else may be listening to the presentation today. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. Today's program, as part of the series, is on the topic of Tajweed. And before we actually commence with the presentation, there are a few things that I would like to mention regarding this topic in general and the presentation as well. When it comes to the topic of Tajweed, just like other Islamic topics and as other Islamic subjects, this field can be quite extensive and detailed. So to cover it or try and encompass the entire field of Tajweed or all the topics related to Tajweed in 1 hour, 1.5 hour will be something which is impossible. So it is for this reason that I have put down in this presentation and selected a few topics that I feel will be directly related to our day-to-day recitation, and I've also selected few other chapters to give a brief overview and with the intention of inshallah creating a desire in your hearts to continue and further your studies in the field of Tajweed. And alhamdulillah, our Durban and KZN area are replete with many scholars, male and female, who are well able to teach this field of Tajweed and Quran. So inshallah, this presentation should serve as a motivation to one and all to go up to these scholars and take out some time in our day and pursue this field inshallah ta'ala. So as you can see from the cover page, we have Tajweed, a glimpse into some important aspects. So this is just serves as we've mentioned already, a mere glimpse into some of the important aspects related to the field of Tajweed. So what are some of the topics that we will try and cover today inshallah? Number one, our introduction to the field of Tajweed. When we say introduction, inshallah, we will discuss 5 principles in covering the name of Tajweed, where was Tajweed, who's the founder of Tajweed, what is the law regarding Tajweed, etc. The second discussion will be the discussion on the Makharijul Huruf, which serves as the most important aspect of this presentation, and Tajweed in general. The third topic will be the topic on the letter Ra, whether the Ra, when will the Ra be read full, when will the Ra be read empty, and the laws and conditions related to it. The fourth topic will be some common errors, and I've selected errors from those often recited parts in the Quran Majid. The next one will be a practical application of Surah Al-Fatiha, very similar to the common errors, but inshallah we will go through it practically. And the last one, the 7 fundamentals of Tajweed for a person who intends on learning this field of Tajweed. Now, when it comes to the introduction of Tajweed, in front of you, you have a few couplets, right? These couplets basically are composed by Abu al-Irfan Muhammad Ali ibn Ali al-Sabban of Egypt. But these couplets are there to introduce a person to any field. It's not necessarily restricted to the field of Tajweed, but the ulama from the field of Tajweed would use these couplets to introduce the reader to this field. Ulama from maybe the field of Hadith will use these couplets to introduce a person to the field of Hadith, and so on and so forth. So within these couplets, you have 10 aspects that are highlighted. Number one, let's read through it. He says, إن مبادئ كل فن عشرة الحد والموضوع ثم الثمرة وفضله ونسبة والواضع والاسم الاستمداد حكم الشارع مسائل والبعض بالبعض اكتفى ومن درى الجميع حاز الشرفا. Basically what he says is that the introductory principles to any field are 10. Number one, al-had, the definition. Number two, al-mawdu', the subject matter. Number three, al-thamara, the benefit of studying this field. Number four, fadl, what is the virtue of studying this field. Number five, nisba, what is the relationship of this field to other Islamic fields of knowledge. Number six, al-wadi', who is the founder of this field. Number seven, al-ism, what is the name of this field. Number eight, al-istimdad, where do we derive this field from. Number nine, hukm al-sharia, what is the ruling of sharia regarding this field. Is it fard? Is it wajib? What is the hukam? And number 10, masail, what are some of the discussions that are studied in this field. So today we will just cover only 5 from these 10 due to time, and inshallah we will try and discuss them in detail. So he says at the end, those who study all 10 attain some nobility, some honor. It's good for you. But others also sufficed on just mentioning a few from these 10 when they were introducing their readers to a particular field. So if we move on to the first principle, and that is al-had, the definition of tajweed. Now, whenever we are defining something, we always define that term linguistically first, thereafter technically. So linguistically, what is the meaning of that term in that language? And then technically, istilahan, the technical applied definition, how do the scholars of that field define that term? So here we have at-tajweed. So what does tajweed mean? So linguistically, we have on the left, at-tajweed refers to the verbal noun of jawwada yujawwidu. Now, tajweed comes from the word or the root letters jim, waw, dal. Those 3 letters, when put onto the scale of jawwada yujawwidu, gives you the meaning of beautifying something, to do something well. Jawwada fulanun shay', so and so person did something well, he perfected something. Now we say tajweed is a verbal noun from this verb. Jawwada, he perfected something. Tajweed is the verbal noun. So to put it into context, into English, for example, you have he decided. That's a verb. And the verbal noun will be decision. So likewise here, jawwada, he did something well. Tajweed, the act of doing something well, doing something beautifully, beautifying something. So that's the linguistic definition. So if we open the dictionary and you look for the root words jim, waw, dal on this scale of tajweed, jawwada, you would find this meaning, to do something well. When it comes to the technical applied definition, how do the scholars of this field define this term tajweed? So we have it under to pronounce every letter from its correct exit point together with fulfilling all its rights. In Arabic, إعطاء الحروف حقها أو إخراج الحروف من مخرجه وإعطاؤه حقه ومستحقه. So to pronounce every letter from its correct exit point. Now, when it comes to the correct exit point, So the exit points of the Arabic alphabets, or any alphabet for that matter, are restricted to 5 organs from your articulatory system. That is, it will come later on, inshallah, in the section on Makharij, but just to go through it very quickly, that is your al-jawf. Al-jawf translates as the emptiness found within your mouth and the throat. The second, your throat. The third, your tongue. The fourth, your lips. And the fifth, the nasal passage. So these are the 5 components of your human articulatory system. So your Arabic alphabets, when we're saying to pronounce every letter from its correct exit point, it will be found within one of these 5 components of your articulatory system. So that's one part of it, to pronounce the letter from its correct exit point. And just to give maybe a further example, so let's just take the example of maybe tha, the letter tha. So I will pronounce it as ath. Now when I pronounce the letter tha, I automatically now know that the exit point of tha is the tip of the tongue, or the top of the tip of the tongue meeting with the edge of the upper incisors. And one point here to take note of, when a person wants to know where is the exit point of a particular letter, then all you need to do is make the letter sakina, that means put a sukoon on the letter and put a hamza before it, and then pronounce it. So like in this example, ath. If it's any other example, at, al, you automatically will realize where the makhraj of that letter is. So continuing with the definition, one is to pronounce the letter from its correct exit point, and number 2, you fulfill all the qualities that are attributed to that letter. So in brackets we have haqq and mustahaq, haqqul harf and mustahaqul harf. Now what is this haqqul harf and mustahaqul harf? As you can see on the last box on the right, haqqul harf refers to all those intrinsic qualities that a letter has. So for example, when you're pronouncing the ta, there will be this quality of the flowing of the breath, which is known as hams. That means whenever this letter is pronounced, that quality will always be found. That is intrinsic to this letter. That is haqqul harf. And mustahaqul harf refers to the circumstantial qualities of a letter. That means based on a circumstance, based on a condition, when that condition is found, this quality will also be found. So it is not always found with the letter. Based on a circumstance, it will be found. For example, the qualities of idgham, idhar, and ikhfa, etc. So again, haqqul harf refers to those qualities which are intrinsic to a letter. It will always be found with the letter. Example, flowing of breath, restriction of breath, flowing of sound, restriction of sound. And mustahaqul harf refers to those qualities which are circumstantial. It will only be found when the condition for that quality is found. An example of idgham I gave, and idhar. So for example, practically, if we say mir rabbihim, so after this noon sakina you have the letter ra, and the law of noon sakina is that after the noon sakina or the tanween, one of the letters of yarmalun appear, then you will merge the noon into the ra. So that is based on a circumstance, based on a condition, this quality will be found of idgham. And there are many other examples to that. So to summarize principle 1 very quickly, the linguistic definition of tajweed is to do something well. The technical definition of tajweed is to pronounce every letter from its correct exit point, together with fulfilling all the rights that are due to that letter. And when we spoke about rights, we mentioned the rights are referring to those qualities that are always found with the letter, and as well as those qualities which are based on a circumstance. Now we move on to the second principle, and that is wadi'u tajweed, the founder of tajweed. Now when it comes to the founder of tajweed, this can be categorized into 2. On the left hand side you have Allah Rabbul Izzah, Jibreel alayhi salam, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and on the right you have some text. Now on the left refers to the practical founder, practically who founded tajweed, and then on the right, the theoretically. So the theoretical aspect and the practical aspect. So when it comes to the practical aspect of Tajweed, we have on the top Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to Jibreel to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So this tells us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught the Quran to Jibreel alayhi salam, who then in turn taught the Quran to Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And when Jibreel alayhi salam taught the Quran to Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he taught it to him in the manner that was taught to him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That means exactly as how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or how Jibreel alayhi salam read the Quran to Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam passed that on to his Sahaba, who then passed that on to the Tabi'un and then the generations after them until it reached us. Now Quran was revealed and was recited with Tajweed, with correct pronunciation. Now this Allah, Jibreel and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam serves a very, very important aspect for any person who is involved in the field of Tajweed, Quran and Qira'at, because your chain of narration, your sanad, links directly back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So from you, your teacher, to his teacher, to his teacher, to the A'imma of Qira'at, and from them to the Tabi'un, to the Sahaba, to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to Jibreel, directly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the practical aspect of Tajweed. When it comes to the theoretical aspect of Tajweed, you have, before we actually read from here, it's important to understand that in the time of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the time just after that as well, access to writing material was very, very difficult. So the basis of learning and teaching at that time was oral transmission. Everything was based on at-talaqqi bil mushafaha. Sahaba radiallahu anhum would learn from Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam orally, just as how we saw on the left, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam learned from Jibreel orally, right? Now when it comes to the theoretical part of it, during the time of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Sahaba would learn from Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam exactly as he read it to them. They would learn it and then pass that way of reading to the other Sahaba and then to the Tabi'un. Later on after that, as writing material became a little bit more available, then you had scholars who, after learning from their teachers, they would write down, as we'd call it, notes. They would write down notes of whatever they learned from the lesson. Now one of the A'imma before the 4th century now, named Abu Amr al-Basri, who was one of the 10 Qurra as well, he wrote an article on the subject of Idgham Kabir. Now this is one of the subjects that a person will study in Qira'at, which we're not going to go into now, but this was in the 2nd century. So Idgham Kabir also has a relationship to the field of Tajweed and as well as to the field of Qira'at. He was one of the first to sort of write down some pointers on this topic. But in the latter 3rd century, beginning of the 4th century, you had a scholar by the name of Abu Muzahim al-Khaqani rahimahullah, who was the first to compose a poem dedicated to the science of Quranic recitation. Now take note of 2 words here. Number 1, he was the first to compose a poem. Okay, and this poem was roughly, I think, 51 lines of poetry. Very short poem, and it was in poetic form, and this was dedicated to the science of Quranic recitation. Second word to take note of, Quranic recitation. In brackets we have husnul ada. That means up to this time the word Tajweed as we know it today was not recognized by the scholars. The word that was used was husnul ada. That means beautifying your recitation, beautification of your Quranic recitation. And that is exactly what this poetry discusses. It discusses general aspects of perfecting your recitation, and it does not mention any of the technicalities that are mentioned in the books that came after Abu Muzahim al-Khaqani. So this poem is known, number 1, as Al-Qasida Ra'iyya or Qasida Ra'iyya, or as well as Al-Khaqaniyya, right? And this work served as a precursor to the later works in the field of Tajweed. The interesting thing here in this work is that This text emphasizes the importance of learning correct recitation of the Quran from a proficient teacher, together with touching on selected rules of tajweed. So he discusses selected rules like the rules of mad, the laws of noon, sakina, and tanween, and other rules as well, but very, very basic and minimal. But he also covers the spiritual aspects of studying tajweed. The spiritual aspects of studying tajweed, such as asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for protection from being arrogant, to being patient, and ensuring that one's study of the Quran is not divorced from applying the teachings of the Quran into one's life. So he discussed the, we call it the spiritual aspect of Quranic recitation and of studying tajweed as well. And an interesting thing is that the scholars around that time, or we call them the mutaqaddimun, the early day scholars, the likes of Makki bin Abi Talib al-Qaysi, rahimahullah, the likes of Abu Amr al-Dani, rahimahullah, al-Qurtubi. Those three were contemporaries, and they also authored books, and their books were also regarded to be one of the first books in the field of tajweed. But the difference was these books were authored in prose form, not in poetic form. So one of the first books, so this is the first text to be put down in the field of tajweed in poetic form, Abu Muzahim al-Khaqani. And the first book to be placed in the field of tajweed in prose form was the book of Makki bin Abi Talib, known as Ar-Ri'ayah. Now the thing is, even in this book of Makki bin Abi Talib, rahimahullah, he also brings the attention of the reader and the talibul ilm towards the spiritual aspect of tajweed, which is a phenomenal thing, because at times when you are studying, you can get sort of carried away, by the knowledge that you are learning. So many a time in the kitab, he will bring you, especially in the field of the discussion of makharij, he alerts us. He gives us some pointers to remember, what, you are studying this for the sake of Allah, have ikhlas, have taqwa. And then when discussing the makharij, you will say, the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we understand his greatness by studying the makharij, by just looking at the details of the makharij, how the letter comes out, how the air from the lungs moves up towards the mouth, how the letters are formed. All that should be indicating to us the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. So this is an important aspect that we should all keep in front of us when studying any field for that matter, and in this case studying the field of tajweed. So as we mentioned there as well, some of the first books that were covered in the first field of tajweed in prose form: number 1, Al-Ri'ayah; number 2, the kitab of Abu Amr al-Dani, Al-Tahdid; and number 3, the book of Al-Qurtubi al-Mudih. Now when it comes to the principle 3, and that is the status of tajweed, right? Now tajweed, without exception, is one of the noblest of Islamic sciences due to its close relationship with the word of Allah, the Holy Quran. So to understand the status of anything, look at what it is attributed to. So tajweed has a direct relationship to the word of Allah, Kalamullah. So all the virtues that the Quran enjoys, a person by reading Quran will receive this and this reward. Likewise, tajweed will fall under that bracket because of its close relationship to the Quran. Now, some of the virtues for a person reciting Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الذين يتلون كتاب الله وأقاموا الصلاة وأنفقوا مما رزقناهم سرا وعلانية إلى آخر الآية. That those people who recite the book of Allah, يتلون كتاب الله, right? And they establish prayer, they give sadaqah from what we have provided them with. What's the reward for them? يرجون تجارة لن تبور. They can hope for a reward from Allah that will never fail. And together with that, لِيُوَفِّيَهُمْ أُجُورَهُمْ وَيَزِيدَهُمْ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ إِنَّهُ غَفُورٌ شَكُورٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward that person in full. So this reward is for all those qualities that I mentioned before, and one of them is to recite the Quran. So by reciting the Quran, obviously with tajweed, A person will enjoy these rewards. When it comes to the ahadith of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, we have the riwayat of narrated from Aisha radiyallahu anha. She says, قالت قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم الذي يقرأ القرآن وهو ماهر به مع السفرة الكرام البررة. That Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, the one who recites the Quran and he is proficient with it. He's proficient in the recitation of the Quran. Now, how do you get proficient with the recitation of the Quran? By learning Tajweed. What's the virtue and the benefit for such a person? He will enjoy the company of the noble and blessed angels. As-safaratul kiramil barara. Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam goes on and mentions والذي يقرأه قال هشام وهو شديد عليه قال شعبة وهو عليه شاق فله أجران. And that person who recites the Quran, but the recitation is difficult for him. It is difficult for him, especially maybe a non-Arabs. The recitation, pronunciation of certain words, certain letters, qualities is difficult. Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but this important to take note here that this person is making an attempt and an effort to learn the correct way. Then falahu ajran, he will get 2 rewards. So these are some of the virtues for a person reading Quran and reading it with Tajweed. And there are many other virtues that I mentioned as well, like you have in the riwayat of Bukhari, إِنَّ أَفْضَلَكُمْ مَنْ تَعَلَّمَ الْقُرْآنَ وَعَلَّمَهُ. The most virtuous amongst you is that person who learns the Quran and teaches it. So wherever we're seeing this, learning Quran, teaching Quran, reading Quran, Tajweed 100% will be part of reciting Quran correctly as it was revealed. Now, when we come to ruling the principle number 4, and that is, what is the ruling of Sharia regarding the study of the field of Tajweed? So we break the ruling, we divide it into 2, the practical aspect and the theoretical aspect. So if we discuss the practical aspect first, that means to recite Quran with Tajweed, what does Sharia have to say about it? So the hukam is, the ruling is, it is fard ayn. That means it is necessary, it is fard upon every single person who recites the Quran to recite the Quran with Tajweed. Fard ayn. When it comes to the theoretical aspect of Tajweed, that means studying the laws of Tajweed as it is codified and written down in the books that we have. So what is the hukam there? So there we divide it further into 2 more branches, and that is the hukam, the ruling for the general public and the ruling for the scholars. So for the general public, for them to study the theory of Tajweed, the Sharia says it is mandub. It is something that is recommended, something that is good. But for the scholars, it is fard kifaya, which means a group of scholars have to take on this responsibility of learning this field to absolve the other scholars from taking on this responsibility. Now, there are 2 questions that arise from this. Number 1, why is the ruling for the scholars fard kifaya and the ruling for the general public mandub? So the reason for an answer to that is that if the scholars do not take up this responsibility of learning this field and passing it on to others, there will come a time where there will be fear of losing this field of knowledge. So that is why it is fard kifaya for the scholars that in every generation there has to be certain group of scholars who take up this responsibility of learning and passing on this knowledge. The second question is, when it comes to the practical aspect of Tajweed, that means reciting Quran with Tajweed, for everyone the ruling is one, and that is fard ayn. Now, generally speaking, we say for a person, if he wants to recite Quran with Tajweed, the only way he can read it with Tajweed is by learning the laws. Otherwise, how else is he going to read Quran with Tajweed? So that is in normal situations. Al-ilmu tabi'un lil-ma'lum. So by right, for the general public also, the hukam should have been fard. That means to learn the theory is fard, because you have to apply the theory in your practical recitation. However, when it comes to Tajweed, the unique aspect of Quran, and we touched on this in the first slide, is that the basis of learning Quran is oral transmission. Oral transmission. That is how we saw it in the time of Sahaba radiallahu anhum. There was no writing down of laws. Exactly how they heard it from Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, they would read it. So the basis, the umdah of tajweed is التلقي بالمشافهة, oral transmission. And if you look at a practical example in our time, the students in the hifth class, they're not learning any theory of tajweed. All they're doing is going to the class, maybe the ustad reads to them, they come back home, hear a recording of it, read it again, learn the sabak, go back the next day, read it to the ustad. If there's any mistakes, the ustad corrects, and that is how they carry on. So when it comes to tajweed, the basis of reciting correctly is mushafaha, oral transmission, not the theoretical learning the theory from the books of tajweed. However, to learn the theory, it will be an added bonus. It will serve as the cherry on the top. It is something that will be mustahsan, something amazing. So that's with regard to the ruling of sharia, practical and the theoretical aspect. Now, when we go on to the last and final principle, and that is the principle of the topics, the masail. What are some of the discussions and topics that we cover in the field of tajweed? So starting from the right hand side, right, these are just some of the the three components which make up majority of the discussion of tajweed. There are many other chapters and topics related to the books of tajweed which we're not going to discuss now, but this is just a basic overview. So on the right of the presentation of the screen, you have makharijul huruf, right? Let me just right. So here you have makharijul huruf, right? Makharijul huruf, basically, as we've mentioned already, they are the exit points for the letters of the Arabic alphabet. Now under that you have number one, al-jawf, al-halq, al-lisan, al-shafatan, and al-khayshum, which I've touched on in the previous slide. And that is, these five components are your five components which make up your articulatory system, right? And your makharijul huruf, the exit points of your letters, will be found within these five areas. So again, to translate it, al-jawf translates as the emptiness in the mouth and the throat. Al-halq is the throat, lisan is the tongue, al-shafatan the lips, and al-khayshum the nasal passage. So that's the first topic that we discussed when it comes to tajweed, makharijul huruf. You can say like 1/3 of tajweed. The second is sifatul huruf. We've touched on this as well in the definition, the qualities of the letters. And if you come down the line, you can see on the right you have sifat lazima, and on the left arida. Now lazima translates as intrinsic qualities. Okay, we discuss it as haqqul harf, right? Those qualities which will always be found with a letter. So here again, this is broken down into two, dhawatu al-dad and la ضد لها, those qualities which have opposites, right? And la ضد لها, those qualities which do not have opposites. And the number of these qualities are 17. So for example, just to give an example of those qualities which have opposites, you have the flowing of breath and then the restriction of breath. You will have the flowing of sound, the restriction of sound. Okay, hams, jahar, shidda, rakhawa. Then you would have isti'la, istifal, the back of the tongue rising, back of the tongue being lowered, and other examples as well. Ismat, idlaq, etc. Here on the category of where there's no opposites, they are 7. For example, qalqala, that's one of the qualities, and you have maybe tafashi, and you have takrar, and many other examples for sifat la ضد لها. On the other hand, you have those qualities which are arida, and this is what we've touched upon in the first in the definition, and those were those qualities which are based on a circumstance, circumstantial sifat. So under that you have few examples of tafkhim and tarqiq, fullness and emptiness. You have ahkam of mim sakina, ahkam of noon sakina. We've discussed that, idgham, idhar, etc. The mudud, mad, When will you pull mad? Only when the condition is found. There's a hamza, or there's a sukun coming after the letter of mad, etc. So these are all based on a circumstance. So that's the second third, صفات الحروف. Comes to the last third, and that is one of also the most important topics of tajweed, and that is al-waqfu wal-ibtida, stopping and starting again. Now, when it comes to al-waqf and ibtida, you have a few discussions. Number one, if you look in this this box, حكم الوقف. What is the hukam of waqf? What do you mean by what is the hukam of waqf? That means by me reciting and by me stopping here, will my stopping affect the meaning of the ayah in the ayah? So based on that, the ulama divide these types of stopping into the following categories. A waqf jaiz will fall under, you'll have at-tam, kafi, and hasan. That means by me stopping here, the meaning is complete, tam. By me stopping here, the meaning is kafi, it's sufficient. And by me stopping here, the meaning is good. You will also have under, just as all falls under the category of jaiz, you will have a category غير jaiz, and that will be qabih, and some even add on aqbah. That means by you stopping there, you are actually distorting the meaning, right? So that is why, based on this, I've mentioned that it is so important for us to learn the language of the Quran, so that when we are reciting the Quran also, we have somewhat understanding of what we are reciting. As you can see, the direct relationship between knowing what you're reading and your correct recitation of the Quran. When it comes to kayfiyatul waqf, that is, how do I stop, right? So it's either, as we all commonly familiar with, sukun mahd. That means you're stopping with a sukun. So for example, if you're reciting ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, ar-Rahim, so there you are stopping with a sukun, ar-Rahman ar-Rahimi. The meme has a kasra, but when you're stopping with a sukun. So that's one way of stopping. Then you have other ways like rom and ishmam. Rom, where you're reciting some part of the haraka, right? And ishmam, where you rounding your lips on certain words, etc. But we won't discuss that now. And then you have al-ibtida, meaning how do I now continue after I stopped? Do I start on the word after? Do I go back? Where about do I go back? How far back do I go? Will the meaning still be intact, etc., etc.? So this basically gives us an overview, basic overview of the main topics discussed in the field of tajweed. Coming to the next discussion, and that is the makharij. Now, makharij translates as the point of articulation of the Arabic alphabets, right? We're studying this is the Arabic language, so we're talking about the Arabic alphabets. Now, when we look at makharij, right, I've put this down, this slide in particular, we've divided it into three aspects, right? We'll start from the right, so where the laser is. Now, aqsamul makharij basically is the different divisions of makharijul huruf. Now, by understanding this, so instead of coming and just putting, maybe 10-20 letters of the makharij of 10 or 20 letters, this will be a better way of giving you an overview, a nice overall understanding of the makharijul huruf, instead of just, you just have to memorize and by heart the makhraj of this letter, makhraj of that letter. After some time, you forget it. So by learning it in this way, you have an overview in your mind, and then to understand the makhraj of a certain letter, or to know the makhraj of a certain letter, becomes very easy. Now, if you look from the right hand side, you have the first category is al-mushtaraka and al-munfarida, right? Then you have al-muhaqqaqa wal-muqaddara and al-amma and al-khassa. Now, let's discuss al-mushtaraka and al-munfarida first. Basically, al-mushtaraka refers to those letters which share with other letters in their exit point, right? And al-munfarida refers to those letters which do not share with any other letter in their exit point. Now, if we start off with those, right, this one here, these refer to the makharij munfarida, those letters which do not share. They are only 7. ضف نرق لك ضاد fa nun ra qaf lam and kaf. So these 7 letters from the 29 Arabic alphabets, they do not share with any other letter in its exit point. Okay, can we just switch off the mic there? Jazakallah khair. And you have the other end, baqiyatul huruf. These are for those letters which are fall under the category of mushtaraka. That means the remainder of the Arabic alphabets after these seven all share in their exit point. Does not mean that all the letters share in one exit point. There are different pairs of letters which share with other letters in their exit points. So al-mushtaraka, al-munfarida. Al-munfarida refers to those letters again which do not share, and there are seven: dif, nariq, qalak, and those which do share the remainder of these Arabic alphabets. When it comes to al-muhaqqaqa and al-muqaddara, now this is the second classification of the makharijul huruf. So muhaqqaqa refers to those exit points in the entire jihazun nutq, that means the entire articulatory system. And when we're saying the articulatory system, we've already explained that it's made up of those 5 components, right? So al-muhaqqaqa refers to those exit points where we can pinpoint exactly the exit for that letter. So for example, if I say the tha, I know exactly if the tongue is meeting with the edge of the upper incisor. If I say the qaf, that portion of the tongue, the back of the tongue, is meeting with the corresponding part on the palate above. If I say the jim, I know the middle of the tongue is meeting with the corresponding part above in the palate. If I say the dad, it's from the side of the tongue, from this side to that side. So these are all, I can pinpoint the exit points for these letters. Al-muhaqqaqa. The opposite of that is al-muqaddara. That means it is not possible to pinpoint the exit point of these letters. I'm not sure exactly where it comes out from. I can't pinpoint. And the reason for that is due to the nature of these letters. Now, again, if we start off, what are the letters of which fall under this category? Al-muqaddara, where you cannot pinpoint, are huruful mad al-thalatha, the 3 letters of mad. Right? So, firstly, what is the letter of mad? Right? It's the alif, the waw, the ya, all sakina, and all should be preceded by their corresponding harakat. So for the alif, when it's sakina, it has to be preceded by a fatha. Okay. For the waw, sakina, preceded by a dhamma, and for the ya sakina, preceded by a kasra. When this is found, that letter now is classified as a letter of mad. So when it comes to now the exit points for these 3 letters, can we pinpoint it in the jihazun nutq? No, it's not possible. These letters end when the breath ends. So for example, if I'm pronouncing waja, ja, so the alif sakina preceded by fatha, which is on the jim, I can't pinpoint where this alif is coming out from. So the only time this letter will end is when the breath ends. Whereas the other letters, for example, ath, the sound ended when the 2 organs met, the tongue and the upper palate, or the tongue and the teeth, whatever else, makes up the makharij of those letters. But in this case, it's not possible. There's no end to it by any organs meeting. So I give an example of the alif. You give an example of a waw. So u, waja, u, same thing. And e, if you just ya sakina preceded by kasra, e, it's not possible to pinpoint where the makhraj is coming out from. So this makes up al-muhaqqaqa and al-muqaddara. Right? Those exit points where you can pinpoint in the entire articulatory system. Al-muqaddara, those which you cannot pinpoint. And there are only 3. Beyond these 3 letters, the remainder of the letters you can pinpoint where they come out from. And the last category is al-amma and al-khassa, which serves as the entire discussion for the next slide, one of the most important. So by understanding the first one and the second classification, it will help you in understanding the third classification, and that is al-amma and al-khassa. Now, al-amma translates as al-ra'isiyya, that means the primary exit points, and al-khassa, the secondary, right? Al-far'iyya. Now, if you see under this again, because we've mentioned it already, you will be familiar with this. We've said we have your khamsa, that means 5. So these 5 refers to, again, the 5 components or organs that make up your articulatory system, which are again al-jawf, the emptiness in the mouth and the throat, the tongue, the lips, and the nasal passage. So these 5 are known as al-makharijul amma. And then you have al-khassa, and they are 17 we have in the box. Now, what is al-makharijul khassa? Right? So al-makharijul khassa, very simply put, are these 17 exit points that are found within these 5 exit points, or these 5 components of your human articulatory system. So these 17 will be found within these 5, and we'll explain a little bit further in the next slide. So now al-makharij al-amma wal-khassa, right? So if you have a look at this, we start from here, right? Al-jawf, again, al-halq, al-lisan, al-shafatan, al-khayshum, right? And then under it you have makhrajun wahidun khas, makharij khasa, thalatha, right? So you have 1 makhraj khas, 3 makharij khasa, 10 makharij khasa, 2 makharij, and 1 makhraj. Now, these are known as your al-amma on the top, first part on the line, which give you 5 at the end. And these under it are known as your khassa, which should give you 17. Right? And if you count it, 1 plus 3, 4, plus 10, 14, 15, 16, plus 2, and plus 1, 17. So these 17 are found within these 5. And if you see, ignore whatever is below that for now. So if you see here, we have 1 exit point is found in the jawf, 3 exit points found in the throat, 10 exit points found on the tongue, 2 exit points found on the lips, and 1 exit point found on the nasal passage. So these 17 will be found within these 5. And then under that you have the letters now that will be divided into these exit points. So in the jawf you have your 3 letters of mad, as we mentioned already. These 3, so the jawf, if you look at it, is a makhraj am and a makhraj khas in one, because there is only 1 exit point found in the jawf for these letters. Understand? So it's an am and khas. It's a primary and a secondary in one, because there's only 1 exit point found here. For how many letters? For these 3 letters of mad. When it comes to the throat, there are 3 exit points. For how many letters? For 6. So let's look at the 3 exit points we have on the right. Aqsa al-halq, that means the bottom of the throat. Why the bottom of the throat? Aqsa translates as furthest portion away. So here, furthest portion away from the lips of the mouth. Okay, the furthest part away from the lips is the bottom of the throat. So aqsa al-halq, there you have 2 letters. Wasat al-halq, middle, 2 letters. Adna al-halq, top of the throat, there 2 letters. So 6 letters found within 3 exit points. These 3 exit points found within 1 main exit point, and that is the throat. So before we continue with this, right, let's just give an example to make it easier to understand. Each of the 5 fundamental exit points here, the jawf, the halq, the lisan, shafatan, and khayshum, let us resemble these 5 to 5 buildings. Okay, under each of them you have a number of exit points, right, which are known as your khassa. So your amma, the 5, your khassa under that. Your amma is like a building, 1 building per component, and you have your khassa, which resemble the number of flats in that building. So you have the amma, for example, the halq is a building, and under it you have 3 flats only. That is your 3 makharij khassa. And within each flat you have a number of rooms. So those rooms, you will resemble them to the letters that you have in the exit point. So you have a building, you have a number of flats, and within the number of flats you have a number of letters. So if you look at it practically, you have the halq, the throat, that's like a building. Within the throat you have 3 exit points, that's 3 flats, and within each flat you have a number of letters. In this case, the hamza, ha, ain, ha, ghain, kha, the number of rooms in those flats. By understanding it like that, you will have, inshallah, you will understand it easier. Likewise, if we move on to the lisan, the tongue, right, we said there are 10 exit points. Again, lisan, like a building, 10 exit points, 10 flats. Within each flat you have rooms. This is now for your letters. So within your tongue, right? As you can see, the most amount of exit points are found on the tongue. Now in the brackets, right, you have qaf and then you have kaf, right? There's supposed to be a bracket after the qaf, but the qaf now comes out from 1. Let's just count 10, right? So qaf is 1, it has its own exit point. Slightly in front of it is the kaf, it has its own exit point, so that's 2. Number 3 for these 3 letters in 1, the jim, sheen and ya. Okay, those 3 come out from another exit point, that's the middle of the tongue. Then you have the dad, another exit point, so that's number 1, 2, 3, 4. The 5th one, the lam, also from the side of the tongue. Dad from the side, lam from the side. So those are 5 exit points thus far. Right? On the next slide, inshallah, we'll show you the classification of the tongue to understand this bit better. Then you have the lam, another 6, the ra 7, the noon 8, ta, dal and ta, ra 6. Somebody's mic is on, you can just mute it, please. Jazakallah khair. You have the ra, the noon, the ta, dal and ta, dha, dal and tha, sad, zai and sin, which gives us 10. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, kaf 9, qaf 10. So these are 10 exit points, right, found for these letters within the tongue. Now just before I move on to the tongue, to understand this, the point we mentioned in the last slide, that you have those letters which share with other letters in their exit point. So you have a look at it here. You have the ta, dal and ta, 3 letters coming out from 1 exit point. You have dha, dal and tha, 3 letters coming out from 1 exit point. Likewise on the throat, you have ayn and ha, 2 letters coming out from 1 exit point. So these letters are known as your makharij mushtaraka. The exit point is shared with more than 1 letter. Whereas you look at qaf, for example, we said ضف نرق لك. So qaf was from those letters which do not share with another letter in their makhraj. So it's one on its own. Likewise the kaf, likewise the lam, likewise the ra, etc. And obviously there's much more details to this because there's difference of opinion when it comes to the lam, the ra and the noon, which we're not going to get into now. Now on the lips you have 2 exit points, right? And one will be for the fa, one will be for the waw, ba and mim. And then for the nasal passage, you have 1 exit point, and that is for the sound of ghunna, sawtul ghunna. I just want to move on to the next slide. We'll come back to this now. I just want to show you this slide here. Right now, just to understand what we were discussing. Right, for now, don't worry about the Arabic part. Right, what I want to show is when it comes to the makharij of the tongue. Right, we said there are 10 exit points. These 10 exit points will be divided into 4 parts of the tongue. Alright, so when we say divided, there's the first part here, aqsal lisan, right? This part here, the back of the tongue. Right, ignore this because this doesn't feature when we're discussing the makharij of the letters, because this is the root of the tongue, jadrul lisan, which is found in the throat. Right, so this is aqsal lisan, the back of the tongue, first category or first part of the tongue. The second one, wasatul lisan, the middle of the tongue. Right, the third category will be, as you see it here, hafatul lisan. That means it's from there right up to here. This makes up the side of the tongue. And the fourth category is this part here, the taraful lisan. That means a loose translation in English would mean tip of the tongue. But as you would see, and if you study this field a little bit more in detail, you would know that to translate taraf as tip is not an accurate translation, because on the taraful lisan you have many parts to it for different letters. So basically, again, you have number 1, right, which makes up your aqsal lisan, sorry, the back of the tongue. Just trying to, okay, you have the aqsal lisan, which makes up the back of the tongue, or which is the back of the tongue. You have wasatul lisan, the middle of the tongue. You have the hafatul lisan, the side, and you have the taraful lisan, which is the front. So those 10 makharij that we spoke about will be found within these 4 parts of your tongue. So very quickly, if we look at the qaf, we said the qaf will be the first one. So qaf will be right there, the furthest back portion, right? Or you can't see that. 1 minute, miss on the laser again. Right, so qaf will be here where the laser is. Slightly below it will be the kaf, right? They both separate makharij, separate exit points, but they are both found in this division of the tongue, which is the back portion of the tongue, right? If you move a little bit more forward, you have the middle of the tongue for those three letters that we've mentioned, the jim, sheen, and ya. That's found here. And if you move to the side now, this is interesting. So if you look at these arrows, right, you have this entire area here. From there right to here is the hafatul lisan. On the side of the tongue, we had two exit points, right? The first exit point starts from here, where the laser is, coming down to there. So from aqsa al-hafa to adna al-hafa, and that is for one letter, the letter dad. We will discuss that in the next slide, inshallah. And the second exit point, which is found on the side of the tongue, is from adna al-hafa, from there to muntaha al-hafa, to here. So those are two exit points on the side. That means we discussed there are 10 exit points. 5 already we've covered. 2 are found in the back, 1 in the middle, and 2 on the side. That gives us 5. We have a balanced remainder of 5. All those 5 now are going to be found on this part of the tongue. That's your taraful lisan. Now that is why I mentioned to translate it as tip of the tongue is not that accurate, right? So now, for example, you'll have your ta, dal, and ta. You'll have your sad, zay, and sin. You'll have your lam. You'll have your ra. You'll have your noon. Those are all will be found in this area of the tongue. So inshallah, this will give you a good understanding of the makharij. So let's just go back 1 minute. All right. So again, now if you look at this, an overview, you have the jawf, the halq, the lisan, the shafatan, the khayshum. Right. Those are your 5 primary makharij, and each one you have your secondary makharij, which should give you 17. Within that, you have your letters now that are found in each of those exit points of the letters of the Arabic alphabet. When it comes to the khayshum also, there is discussion in that. Due to time, we won't discuss that inshallah too detail. But basically, the sound of ghunna comes out from the khayshum. This sound of ghunna is found within 2 letters only, and that is the letter of mim and the letter noon. So that sound of ghunna intrinsically, when the mim is pronounced, the sound of ghunna will be there. Remember, I'm saying sound of ghunna, I'm not saying elongation of the sound of ghunna. That is a different thing. So if I'm reading, for example, an'amta صراط الذين أنعمت, in that noon that I read, an, the sound of ghunna is found within it intrinsically. But elongation of the sound of ghunna is, for example, if I read inna, that's now elongation of the ghunna. Okay, there's a difference between the two. If we move on now to an explanation of selected letters, we went through this tongue. We'll revert back to this here to explain certain makharij, right? Let's look at the letter dad. Now, we have the makhraj. It is pronounced from aqsa hafat al-lisan, till adna hafat al-lisan, which I've showed on the tongue. We'll show it again. Together with those teeth in brackets, adras, those teeth are referred to as adras, that lie opposite it, that lies opposite that portion of the tongue. The dad can be pronounced from the right, that means only the right side, or the left, that means only the left side, or both sides at once, or both sides together. And pronouncing the dad from the left side is said to be easier. In the books of Tajweed, from experience, the scholars mentioned pronouncing it from the left hand side is said to be easier, but each person is different. Now, let's explain this makhraj of dad. Right? If we go, before I actually explain it on this slide, let's look at this picture again. Right? Remember, we said here aqsa al-hafa, adna al-hafa. Now, when we're speaking of the letter dad, the dad is pronounced from here, where this arrow is, where the laser is, right, all the way to there, adna al-hafa. That is the hayz, the makan, the area of the letter dad. Now, obviously, the same will apply to this side. Okay, but we're discussing it on one side, or either if you're pronouncing it from one side or 2 sides, whatever, but the same makhraj, right? So the dad is pronounced from there to there, right? Now let's understand it on this picture here. Okay, the dad now, so when you're discussing the makhraj of dad, you understand it in 2 parts. Now, number 1, area of contact, mantiqatu talamus, and area of pressure. that area where there will be ضغط and al-ittika. There will be some pressure when pronouncing it. Now, if we focus on this part first, the area of pressure, right? It's in green. So again, same picture of the tongue. أقصى الحافة أدنى الحافة. Furthest back portion of the side of the tongue to the nearest part towards the edge, towards the tip of the tongue, right? So the dad is pronounced from here to there, and this green area is the area where there will be pressure on the tongue, pressure between the tongue and the upper palate above it. So that is why this area will be corresponding to this area on your upper palate. The green area is to show and indicate that this is where there will be a good amount of pressure. That is why some scholars, when they explain the letter of dad also, that when a person is reciting the letter dad, especially when it is sakina, then there will be like a sort of nafkh, like a sort of blowing on the cheeks of a person, a bloating in the cheeks of a person, and that is because of that pressure that is created within the tongue and the upper palate above it. So again, the first part of the dad is that the side of the tongue will touch this corresponding area on the upper palate, that means covering predominantly the molars and the premolars, right, with force. Okay, with force, the area of pressure, there will be pressure there. Now the yellow area, if you can see, is found on the tip of the tongue, and then corresponding to that is here the roots of the upper incisors, etc., all around here. Now this area is the area of a very slight meeting, very slight touching, talamus. Some mention there's barely any touching at all, it's coming very close. Now let's understand why this is happening and understand the incorrect way of reciting this. Now, what happens generally when people are pronouncing the letter dad is that they apply pressure on this area instead of this area. And as a result of that, that dad sounds like a dal, a full mouth dal, wala dolin. Because you are emphasizing and you are putting pressure on this area, but in actual fact you need to be placing pressure on the side of the tongue. The majority focus of the makhraj of dad is the side of the tongue and not the tip of the tongue, right? Because that is for the makhraj of dal and other letters. So by pronouncing the letter dad, firstly we understand the area of pressure will be on the side and not in the front. Now, coming to the second question, why is it then that there is some sort of slight contact on this front area, right? And to understand that, we have to understand a little bit of the sifa of dad, and that is the sifa of istitala and rakhawa, but mainly istitala. Basically, whenever dad is pronounced, especially when it is sakina, you have this quality of istitala, which literally means elongation. In this case, the tongue is moving forward. The tongue is protruding forward. It's lengthening forward. And why is that happening? As we've explained, that when the breath comes out from the lungs, okay, it passes through the throat, and before it enters the mouth, the entrance to the mouth, now from the back of the throat, from the back of the mouth, is very, very small. And the reason for that is another quality of dad, if just to remind ourselves, haqqul harf, those qualities which are always found with the letter. So one of the qualities that are always found with dad will be isti'la, meaning the back of the tongue, that's this area, will go up. Now because that area of the tongue is going up, right, just picture it, that back of the tongue is going up, the air is coming out from the throat. Now when the air is coming there, it's finding that the entrance to the mouth is very small. It's sort of closed up. So that amount of air that's coming out, the back of the tongue is raised, plus the size of the tongue now against the makhraj of dad, there's very minimal area. So at that point, the breath or the air pushes the tongue slightly forward. You call it تحت تأثير هذا الضغط. Under that pressure, the effect of that pressure, the tongue moves slightly forward. Okay, the breath pushes the tongue slightly forward, but remember, it's pushing it along the makhraj of dad, and that is why you have the slight amount of contact on the roots of the, or the gums of the upper incisors. It's because of that air that's pushing, and the reason for it is because we mentioned the area to enter the mouth was very small because of the quality of isti'ala. So I hope this you understand. If you have any questions regarding this, we can see towards the ending of the presentation, inshallah. So this is basically the dad, right? Again, the focus of dad is on the side, not on the front, and the front will only be there as I explained the reason behind it, and that will barely be any touching, or if there's touching, it will be very, very light. So just to give an example, maybe if you're pronouncing it, pronounce it هذا من فضل ربي فضل ربي فضل ربي. That's the pronunciation of dad when it comes to the makhraj. Okay, and you can hear some of the recordings of Sheikh Ayman Suwaid in terms of pronouncing the correct pronunciation of the letter dad. Now when it comes to the next letter, and that's the letter of dha, right? So the makhraj of dha, as I mentioned also, I only selected 3 letters, and these 3 letters I selected them because of the common error in their pronunciation. When it comes to the dha, right, we have the makhraj. The dhahru taraf al-lisan touches the bottom edge of the upper incisors, and note the dhahru taraf al-lisan refers to the top of the tip of the tongue closer to the ra'sul lisan. Now again I mentioned to translate taraf al-lisan just as tip of the tongue, it's a bit not very accurate. So here dhahru taraf al-lisan, let me just go back, let's just go back to this picture here, right? Dhahru taraf al-lisan refers to this area here where the laser is at the bottom here. So that's dhahr. Dhahr refers to anything that's apparent. So even if you're on your hand, the inside, your palm is refers to batin, and the top is refers to dhahir, the dhahr. Okay, so this means the top. Dhahr means the top. Dhahru taraf al-lisan. Taraf, again we said, is this entire area, but the dhahru taraf is referring to this area here where the laser is. So for the dha, dhahru taraf al-lisan touches the edge of the upper incisors. So if you go back here, right, you see it there, right? The dhahru taraf al-lisan touches the edge of the upper incisor. There's your upper incisor, there's the edge of it meeting with the dhahru taraf al-lisan. Remember, an important thing is we specifically mentioning here the top part of the taraf al-lisan. That means if you go back to this picture again, right, the taraf al-lisan, where is it? It's only around this area here. Okay, beyond that you are no longer in the area of taraf al-lisan, you're moving towards wasat al-lisan. So when we're speaking about the makhraj of dha, if you're going to take out more than the taraf al-lisan from the mouth in pronouncing dha, you're going to be pronouncing it incorrectly, right? So it needs to be minimal amount, and there's nothing to worry about because naturally many of these letters, the makharij of these letters are something that is natural. That is the way the letter is pronounced. Whether you try and make an effort for it or don't, it's going to be pronounced like that. Not all, some of the letters, right? But here just be careful of taking out too much of the tongue from the mouth when pronouncing the letter dha. So again, the dhahru taraf al-lisan touches the bottom edge of the upper central incisors, right? And I've explained it too. Pronunciation wise, al-zalimin. Okay, now the incorrect way of pronouncing dha, very, very popular, we hear it, is za. Now that has no sounding at all in the field of Tajweed and Arabic alphabets. There's no za. Okay, it is dha. So the same exit point of tha, of dhal will be that of dha, with very, very minimal differences, and that is a little bit more detailed. We won't discuss that now, but all you need to know for now is the dha is pronounced with the top of the tip touching the edge of the upper incisors and not za. So for example, fi lawhim mahfuz. Okay, not mahfuz. All right, al-zalimin, not al-zalimin. A very common error. Let's move on to the last one, and that is the letter sad. The letter sad. Now, what's the makhraj firstly? Between the ra'sul lisan and both the central incisors, with the Ra'sul Lisan being closer to the inner surface of the lower incisors, whilst maintaining a slight gap between the upper and lower incisors and the Ra'sul Lisan. Okay, there's a lot written there, but basically, very simply put, if we focus on this picture, right? Let's focus first upper incisor, lower incisor, right? Remember, in terms of your teeth, you have two upper incisors, central, and two bottom central incisors. Next to them you have your lateral incisors, then you have your canines, then you have your premolars, then your molars, and then your wisdoms, right? Now when it comes to your teeth, upper central 2, bottom central 2, right? We're saying now maintain a gap between these two. That means these two teeth should not be touching, right? And also when we're speaking about gaps and areas on the tongue, when it comes to makharij, the actual fact is that these gaps and these areas are very, very, very minimal, very, very small. But because to understand it better, these pictures, sometimes in our mind we think, oh, middle of the tongue is here, oh, I'm feeling like it's coming out from the back, it's not coming out from the middle. But sometimes it is actually coming out from the middle, but you have an idea in your mind that the middle of the tongue is a little bit more further back or a little bit further front. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So again, the gap between the two teeth is not a massive gap, it's a very small, slight gap. And together with that, where the laser point is, the tip, or as we termed it, Ra'sul Lisan. Ra'sul Lisan refers to, let's go back to this picture. Right? Ra'sul Lisan refers to this point here. In some lughat in Arabic, they refer to this as Sumkul Lisan. Okay, Sumk. So Ra'sul Lisan refers to this area. Now, if I'm going to say this is the tip of the tongue, then we spoke about another makhraj, tip of the tongue. You understand? Inconsistency. So here we're saying the Ra'sul Lisan, the head of the tongue, right? So in this area we're talking about. So this is the area for Sad, Zai, and Sin. Let's go back to this picture. Right, so that area, there's it there. It is between the upper and lower incisors, but closer to the lower incisors, right? Closer to the lower incisors, the inner surface. There's the inner surface here, exactly there, of the lower incisors, right? And there is a gap between the tip of the tongue and the surface of the lower incisor, as there is a gap between the upper and lower central incisor, right? So that is where the letter Sad is pronounced from. Together with that, the two other letters, the Sin and the Zai, are pronounced from this area. So that means, I'm just going to mention one point. In these three, or the previous example, we mentioned Dha, Dhal, and Tha, and here we're saying Sad, Sin, and Zai. They pronounce from the same area. Question may come to your mind, so then why do they all sound different? If they're all coming out from the same area, why are they sounding different? So that is now where the discussion of sifatul huruf, qualities of huruf, come into play. That each one is sounding different because of the qualities that are attributed to it. A letter will not have anything less than 5 qualities. 5 qualities per letter. There's a lot of qualities for a letter. Again, we go back to the the dafi' ruhani, the spiritual aspect of Tajweed. That it's amazing to think that just behind a small letter, how much of things are occurring, how many different things are occurring. Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is great. So As-Sad, so the Sad, the Zai, and the Sin come out from the same area, but each one will sound different because of the qualities that are attributed to it. And in this case, if I'm pronouncing, let's say, As, right, and I may pronounce Az, that's the Zai, and I'll pronounce the Sad As. So all are coming out from the same area, but the difference is the qualities. So the Sad will be sounding like the Sin, with the difference that the Sad is full. And the reason it's full, as you can see there, the back of the tongue, it has isti'la, the back of the tongue is raised. That is why it's sounding different. Now, let's look at a practical example, right? Before we go there, the incorrect way of pronouncing the Sad is, number one, to round your lips. So people think full mouth means rounding of the lips. That's incorrect. Full mouth does not mean rounding of the lips. Full mouth, as you see in this picture, is something that's occurring within the mouth. Yes, there will be a slight amount of rounding of the lips naturally, but we should not be making an attempt to round the lips. The fullness is occurring within the mouth. The tafkhim is occurring within the mouth. Number one. Number two, when pronouncing the sad, common error is the sad is mixed with a sound of sheen. That also happens because of rounding of the lips. So for example, اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين. Incorrect. Right? So if we want to learn the pronunciation, let's take this word of example. Sirata, right? So pronounce it first with the sin, sirata. That's a sin. Then sad, si, sirata, 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 not sirata. There's a difference in the pronunciation. So sad, that's the exit point for the letter sad. We'll come back inshallah to this. I think we have a little bit limited time. If there's time, we'll discuss that. This is also very important. Let's discuss this. All right. And that is now the 7 fundamentals for any person who is learning the field of Tajweed. Right. Now, in order to attain correct recitation, in order to attain proficiency in your tilawah of Quran, 7 things are required. From the 7, the first one, all right, makharij, knowledge of the makharij, we just discussed that now. Then knowledge of the sifat, we touched on it very briefly, all right. To know which law of tajweed will apply when 2 letters appear together. This can be looked at into 2 parts. Knowing which law of tajweed will apply when 2 letters appear together. So for example, if we have the example here, قد تبين or الرآه, right? You have the noon and then you have the letter ra. Now if I don't know, if I don't have knowledge of that after this noon sakina, one of the letters of yarmalun come, the law of idgham is going to take place. If I have no knowledge of that, how will I read it? An ra'ahu istaghna. Likewise, قد تبين, if I don't know that, I cannot merge or that you have to merge the dal into the ta, I will read it as قد تبين. But the correct way is قد تبين الرآه. So that's telling us to know which law of tajweed will apply when 2 letters appear together. 2 letters, dal and ta, noon and ra. These are just examples, right? The relationship of letters. There's a whole discussion in tajweed, tajanus, at-taqarub, taba'ud, etc. Right? So based on this, laws will be applicable. Likewise here, لَإِن بَسَطْتَ. Now it's easy for the mouth to just make it idgham. You will say لَإِن بَسَطْتَ. But to know, no, here I cannot merge the ta into the ta because of the qualities the ta has, because of the strength that the ta has over the ta, etc., etc. So you need to know the laws that apply when 2 letters come together. And the last example, an'amta, that here there's after the noon sakina there's a ayn there, so I cannot make ikhfa to make idhar, there's no elongation of ghunna, and so on and so forth. So the third important thing is to know, basically to have an understanding of the laws of tajweed, right? Because remember, to know a letter, or you learn the pronunciation of a letter with the sifat, etc., and you pronounce it as I explained initially, make it sakin and put a hamza before it, right? You can pronounce it hundreds of times and you can even perfect a recitation. But when taking that now and putting it together, halatu tarkib, you're putting that letter with another letter, or you're putting that word with another word, that's where the challenge and the test comes in. To see now how you are pronouncing it. On its own is very simple. I can pronounce it hundreds of times, get the quality right, get the makhraj right. Or put it together with another letter, like how we got here, for me to pronounce the ta, okay, I got the ta, I got the ta, but now put them together here. How do you pronounce it? And so that's where the challenge comes. That's where the practice is required. The fourth one, knowledge of waqf and ibtida, and we discussed this, very briefly. It's a fundamental, something you need to know. Amongst the Quranic ayah, وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا, the Mufassirun and the Sahaba, the Tabi'un, many scholars, they give an interpretation of the meaning of tartil. Okay, so amongst the different interpretations of tartil, so if you translate it, it means recite Quran in a slow and measured tone, right? Pace. So amongst the different explanations, you have scholars like Ibn Abbas radiallahu an, Hasan al-Basri radiallahu an, Qatada radiallahu an. They explain it, some explain it as وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا يعني بينه قراءة مبينة قراءة مفسرة حرفا حرفا. Every letter is clear. All the sifat are found for the letter. The makharij is correct and accurate. And there's different explanations. One of the famous explanations is that of Ali radiallahu anhu, where he says, تجويد الحروف ومعرفة الوقوف. Tajweed al-huruf now will encompass all that we've mentioned before. The makharij, the sifat, all of that. And look at the second part that he mentions, ma'rifatul wuquf. Knowledge of waqf and ibtida. Very, very important. There's a hadith of Umar radiallahu anh, if I'm not mistaken, speaking about, the importance of waqf and ibtida. So, and I mentioned also that there's a direct relationship between the recitation of Quran and understanding the meaning of Quran as well. So if there's anything that we take on from here, inshallah, is that make an effort now to go and learn some of, little bit basics of the Arabic language. Maybe ask the ulama, which is a reputable book of tafsir. You have Ma'arif al-Quran, Tafsir Uthmani. Look into it, look at the meaning of Quran, go and learn the Arabic language. Inshallah, it will be of great benefit. The next one, basic knowledge of Quranic orthography. That means basic knowledge of the Quranic script. And the reason for that is because it directly affects your recitation. And look at the example we have here, Rahmat and Rahmah, right? Both forms are written in the Quran. Now, when it comes to your recitation, if I have to stop on this word, all right, and the word is written like this with the open ta, right? If I'm stopping, I stop as Rahmat. But here with the closed ta, I stop as Rahmah. So now, if I'm not aware of this, and I just think everywhere this word Rahmah comes, I'm going to read Rahmah. And if I have to stop on the first one, I'll be stopping incorrectly. Likewise, if I look here in Surah Namal, right? لَأَذْبَحَنَّ, which translates as I will certainly slaughter it. Okay. Now look at how it's written. La أَذْبَحَنَّ, which could translate as I will not slaughter it. So وَتَفَقَّدَ الطَّيْرَ فَقَالَ مَا لِيَ لَا أَرَى الْهُدْهُدْ أم كان من الغائبين لأعذبنه عذابا شديدا أو لأذبحنه. I will give him a severe punishment or I will slaughter it. Referring to the story of Sulaiman alayhi salam. Okay, so here, if I'm not aware that it's written like this and I'm reading Quran and I say La أذبحنه, I change the entire meaning. And there's other examples here as well. Look at the example of بأيد وإنا بأيد. If you look there, it's 2 years, written with 2 years in the Mus'haf. Ulaika, written on an extra wow. The reason for all of this, you may be thinking, why is it written like that? The reason for all of this is this was a certain methodology that was adopted when Uthman radiallahu anhu and the Sahaba were together, and compiling the Quran. And there's also difference of opinion on that, whether the way they wrote it down was as a directly as a direct command from Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, etc. But that's all for the discussion on ulum al-Quran. But for now, the important thing to note is it's written like this. My responsibility is to know how it's written, and the only way you can identify how it's written is for those who are huffaz, go and make a full khatam to a teacher. For those non-huffaz, make a khatam looking inside to your imam of your masjid, the scholars that are around you. And as we mentioned, there are many scholars. If there's anything that you take away from this lesson today, is one thing, that let us now go back, try and make it like how we understand the importance of salah, importance of fasting, importance of hajj and zakat, etc. This is also a fundamental of your deen. Before I pass away, I want to try and finish one khatam of the Quran under a qualified and a proficient teacher, as you'll see in the next 2 points coming under. Approach, there's many scholars. Go to them. Please let me read, even if it's 1 page a day, 1 page, even if it's half a page a day. So you know that I'm reciting Quran correctly. One of my teachers were mentioning the other day that he was listening to the door of a student. And this person is maybe 30s, 40s now, Hafiz. And he was reciting and he read a word wrong. So, my teacher corrected him. So he's telling my teacher, for the last 30 years or so, I've been reading this word like this, incorrectly. And he's a Hafiz. So how many more errors there may be in our recitation for the non-Hufaz, and we may not be aware of them. So Make this your responsibility, inshallah, especially now the month of Ramadan is approaching. Make this your main goal, main purpose. I'm going now to ensure that my recitation of Quran is correct and accurate. And come to the sixth one, to learn the Quran from a qualified and proficient teacher, which is very, very important because each person has expertise in his field, right? So the field of Tajweed and Qira'at are for the Qurra. So if you want to learn how to recite Quran correctly, you approach the Qurra. They are the masters of the field, learning from a proficient teacher. And the last one, continuous practice and repetition in order to attain proficiency. These two actually are very, very important. Allama Jazari rahimahullah, one of the great scholars in the field of Tajweed and Qira'at, any person who's involved in this field of Tajweed and Qira'at is indebted to his work and indebted to him for the work he has done in this field. So this personality, great personality, mentions وَلَا أَعْلَمُ سَبَبًا لِبُلُوغِ نِهَايَةِ الْإِتْقَانِ وَالتَّجْوِيدِ وَوُصُولِ غَايَةِ التَّصْحِيحِ وَالتَّسْدِيدِ مثل رياضة الألسن والتكرار على اللفظ المتلقى من فم المحسن. That he says, I don't know of any other way a person can achieve proficiency and perfection in his recitation of Quran besides two things. What are the two things? What we just got here. Learning from an expert teacher and practicing the correct way that you've learned it from the teacher, not one time, not 10 times, not 20 times, hundreds of times till you are confident and till your teacher is confident that you are now pronouncing it correctly. Sit in front of the mirror, sit with the tasbih and practice it. One of my teachers in Egypt, may Allah bless him, he used to tell me that, when traveling from one teacher to another, so you would travel in area Kafru Sheikh, so you travel from Alexandria to another area, Dusuq, and while traveling, in Egypt the traffic is a lot. So a lot of time would go in traveling. So in the car, in the taxi, he would be sitting with the tasbih and practicing the correct way of reciting. Just how he learned it, he'll be practicing. This only through this do we attain perfection. People sometimes they practice 10 times, some students 10 times, 20 times, come the next day, the next lesson, they're still reading it wrong. Then you ask, why are you not practicing it? No, I'm practicing it. How many times? 10 times. That's not enough. You need to be practicing hundreds of times in order to attain some proficiency. And also with that is the quality of sabr, until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens the way for you. So these are basic 7 principles that are required, or 7 fundamentals. Now let's move on to common errors. All right, these are some common errors which I've selected from the areas that are normally recited in commonly recited. Number 1, we won't go through all period of time, so let's look at this one. Right, ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا. Right, the common error is to say ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا. You merge this ghain into the qaf. Right, so that's easy for the tongue, so that's what happens. So we need to ensure that is not happening. لا تزغ قلوبنا, ghain then qaf. Right, and there's reasons for that, the qualities behind that ghain, etc. We're not going to go into that now. For now, just understand the incorrect way and the correct way. Here, كذبت ثمود. The incorrect way, كذبت ثمود. You merge the ta into tha. Similar like the previous one where you're merging. So ensure that there's some sort of breath, hums that is found on the ta. كذبت ثمود. كذبت ثمود. Don't pause on the letter because that's also incorrect. But initially, if you're trying to figure your way around, you're practicing on your own, that's fine. But when you're reciting it now, there shouldn't be any sucked, any pausing. Let your recitation flow. كذبت ثمود. Right? Likewise, on that example is the same thing. أنزل السورة. Right? Here now, if you look at this example, ألم أعهد. Right? ألم أعهد. The common error, ألم أحد إليكم. أحد إليكم. Because that's what's easier. Right? So the أعهد. Recite the ayn, finish with the ayn, then move on to the ha. أعهد. أعهد. Right? Here. كيف فعل. The common error, ألم تر كيف فعل. كيف فعل ربك. So what is happening there? What the ulama term as ikhtilas. That means you are stealing from the haraka of the letter. Okay? You're snatching away some part of the haraka. ألم تر كيف فعل ربك. كيف فعل. Not كيف فعل. right? So this happens in many other words in the Quran, but I just selected this example because we are familiar with this, right? If you look at here, الذي يوسوس, common error to merge these two yas. الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس. الذي يوسوس. Right? So what you need to do to get it right, a slight elongation, a slight, not mud, not pulling, a slight elongation in this ya. To understand it, maybe just a quick opening of the finger. الذي يوسوس, and after you do that slight elongation, round your lips for the dhamma on the ya. الذي يو. Okay, that will help you in, not merging these two. Likewise here, إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات. آمنوا و, not آمنوا و, right? This line is important. All three examples from إنا أنزلناه في ليلة القدر. The common errors here is that these raws at the end are not heard in your recitation, right? How do you get these? So the incorrect way will be في ليلة القدر. You didn't hear the ra. How do you hear the ra? You ensure that the qualities found on the letter before the ra are clear. So for example here now, your dal has qalqala. So ensure that the qalqala is clear and then move on to the pronunciation of the ra. So في ليلة القدر. قدر, not qadar, that's fatha on the dal, right? Qadr. So by ensuring that the quality of qalqala on the dal is heard correctly, the ra will also come out correct, right? Next one here, min alfi shahr. Shahr, not shahr, not shahr. Okay, be careful of shahr. So how you do it? After the sheen, you join to the ha, open your mouth, pull it slightly, and then read the ra. Min alfi shahr. Shahr. Okay? And here, min kulli amr. So here, close your mouth on the meme, pull it slightly, and then read the ra. Min kulli amr. Amr, not amr. Okay? That's with regard to that surah. Here, very quickly, you have the example, the error of making naql, right? That means you are transferring the haraka on this letter to the letter coming after. Sorry, the letter coming after to the letter before it. So here, قد أفلح. قد أفلح, right? The dal is sakina, the hamza has a fatha. So you're saying, instead of saying قد أفلح من تزكى, you say قد أفلح من تزكى, especially in Tarawih Salah. Tarawih Salah, very common because people are reading fast. So you're dropping off the sukoon and you're putting a fatha on it, which is incorrect. It's not قد أفلح, it's قد أفلح. So you need to make yani bayan of the sakin on the dal, as well as tahqiq, which the term is tahqiq al-hams of the hamza. Aflaha. Likewise here, إذا متنا, not أإذا متنا. Likewise here after Ahmad, يا أيها الذين, not يا أيها الذين. Big difference. Likewise here, ثم رددناه أسفل, not رددناه واسفل, right? And أولئك, same thing. And very quickly on the end here, فلا تقهر. فلا in Surah Al-Duha, فلا تقهر, not تقهر. Don't read the ta full, don't read the ha full. تقهر. Likewise here, فوسطنا, not فوسطنا. Okay, the scene is empty. Then the ta, فوسط, سطنا. And like on the end here, فوسطنا به جمعا. جمعا, not جمعا. Close your lips, pull slightly on the meme, and then read the ayn. في تضليل, not تضليل. تضليل. واستغفره. فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفره, not واستغفره. واستغفره. Maulana, should we stop here? Got two more slides. Or should we continue with this one here or stop, inshallah? let me just discuss one more thing maybe before we actually finish off. Right, I won't go through the entire surah. Inshallah, maybe those who want, we can have a part 2. You can, if there's any questions, since there's no time for questions, and if other requests, you can email it to the email that is found in the beginning of the presentation, alquran@alburhan.org. But before we continue, then just this one error here is that, see, I highlighted all the ya and the noon in blue, ya and the meme, ya and the noon, ya and the noon, ya and the meme, likewise there, right? The common error here is to recite this ya with the sound of ghunna. So you say Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And how do you know that that mean sound is coming out from the nose? By blocking your nose. So if I do this Al Alameen, that tells me that the sound of the ya is coming out from the nose, which is incorrect. So you need to make takhallus from that. You need to get rid of the sound of ghunna from coming out from the nose for this ya. There's no ghunna on the ya. The ghunna is for the noon. But the reason the incorrect pronunciation comes out is because of the ya being next to the noon. It has an effect on the ya. So we need to get rid of that. And how you get rid of that is by dropping your jaw. Okay, inkhifadul fak, you drop your jaw. So now if you practice and you say Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, and then you also press onto your nose, now you will notice that that sound is not coming out because you dropped your jaw. Slight difference makes a slight change in the jaw makes a big difference in the pronunciation. Likewise, apply all of that to this Ar-Rahim, not Ar-Rahim, from the nose. Ad-Deen, Nasta'een, Al-Mustaqim. Inshallah, maybe another time you can go through the entire surah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept, benefit each one, and make it a means of our sadaqah jariyah, inshallah ta'ala.